Last week we started this brand new teaching series called "Why Can't We Be Friends?" And we're sort of asking that big question, considering what kinds of walls, what kinds of barriers, what kinds of things might prevent us from having good friendships and good relationships with people that we care about and people who are maybe strangers to us. And what are the things that divide us? What are the things that are in the way? And so we're asking that question not rhetorically, not hypothetically. We're asking, why can't we be friends? And we're trying to come up with some real answers. We're trying to sort of boil it down and say, here's why we can't be friends, because, and last week the answer was because I have problems, right? The first answer to the question, why can't we be friends, is because I have problems. Drew has problems, and also probably you do, right? That was sort of the nature of that in any of our interpersonal relationships, any of our friendships, and especially the ones that matter the most to us, that we have a responsibility to take some ownership for our own problems and to go into every friendship saying, I'm kind of messed up. I got some stuff I got to sort through, some stuff I got to work through, some stuff I need to be hyper aware of if we're ever going to have a good friendship. And maybe that answer to the question was a little out of left field for you. Maybe that was something you weren't expecting. Maybe that wasn't an answer that you would have had at the ready. And maybe this week's topic would be something that you would be more likely to say, well, here's why I think we can't be friends. Here's the issue that I see. And you'd be right. I think this is the thing that probably that creates the most tension, the most difficulty in marital relationships, the most difficulty and tension in friendships, the most difficulty and tension in work environments, and even just globally. Even this is the problem at the core of it all, at the center of it all. Can you guess what it is? Because we are different. Is that news to you? You didn't know that? Did you think everybody here believed everything that you believed? And did you think everybody here just thought the same way that you think about everything and lives their life the same way you live your life? And you thought so? Yeah. Well, we're different. This might be news to you, and that's probably the biggest issue. Now, we have to start with I have problems, because you can't really change the fact that everybody else is different than you and you need to fix them. Like, we got to start with us. But today I want to explore and look at some of the differences that may exist between us. I would imagine I'm going to talk about some things that you would just agree with, that you'd probably just at the outset you would say, yep, that is a difference between me and other people, and yep, it's kind of a silly reason for me to treat people differently, and I fixed that. And so I'm going to talk about those parts for other people in the room, right? Just in case you would say, yeah, I know that's an issue. Yeah, I know that's the wrong way to think of and treat people. I don't have that problem. Just let me talk to somebody else then for just a moment, and we'll move through the sermon notes. You got your sermon notes? You like the fact that we get to write with ink and paper here at Risen Church? That's a learning thing, first and foremost. I don't know if I've ever really thought of myself as a preacher. I've thought of myself as a teacher. Like, I really care about people learning and learning the gospel. And one of the things that we know that new research is showing us is that taking notes on a cell phone is an extremely ineffective way to learn. So, I do it. I do it a lot because it's so convenient, but we're learning that, believe it or not, these little devices where you also receive your email and text messages and phone calls, and where you also have Candy Crush and Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat, whatever that is. I don't know, the kids are talking about it, never been on it. These devices actually make it difficult for us to learn, and so we provide you with a piece of paper and ink. And also, I don't want you to lose the ability to write, because I figure you probably don't write anywhere else except for when you come to church, and we might need it sometime. You ready? Genesis chapter 25. Last week we talked about Genesis chapter 4. We talked about the first set of brothers in all of the scriptures, and today we're going to talk about another set of brothers. I actually would like to do this for all 4 weeks of this series. We have some things that we're going to address in the coming weeks, and I think we'll probably be looking at more brothers in the Old Testament, more brothers in Genesis, because this happens a lot. There's an interesting thing that happens all throughout Genesis, the very first book of your Bible, of a paper copy of the Bible, the first book that appears in there, the earliest recorded human history on the planet, really, the earliest signs of life that we have, record these stories of brothers who can't get along. Several of them. Like Cain and Abel is the first story ever of brothers, and they can't get along. One of them kills the other one. Then we have Isaac and Ishmael, these two brothers, the sons of Abraham and Sarah, and they can't get along, and they have to separate, and they become these huge tribes. And actually, Isaac is the father. Just a little side note, give you a little Bible history. This isn't in the notes, and I'm going to run out of time if I do this too much, so somebody keep me in line. But Isaac is the father of the Israelite nation, of the Jewish nation. Isaac is the firstborn son of Abraham that actually carries out the Jewish nation. And Ishmael is the father of the Muslim nation. So these two families that have been at war together started with these two brothers that were born into strange circumstances and couldn't get along, that we found in Genesis. And then today we're actually going to look at two more brothers, Jacob and Esau. And we're going to have a lot of fun with this story. We have a couple of terrible parents in this story that we're going to laugh at. Is that all right with you guys? I mean, it's been a long time. You know, they weren't here. They haven't been here for a very, very long time. I don't think it's going to hurt their feelings, and we're going to learn from their mistakes, but we're probably going to laugh a little bit, and that's okay. They made some mistakes. I made some mistakes as a dad, and given enough time, I'll be willing to laugh at those things too. So I think it's okay. I checked with Jesus this week, and I think he's okay with it too, that we're going to laugh at these two parents, Isaac and Rebekah. Now, Rebekah has difficulty conceiving a child early on. She's not able to get pregnant, and Isaac prays for her in verse 22, where I'm going to get started. It says, Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was unable to have children. And the Lord answered Isaac's prayer, and Rebekah became pregnant with twins. Be careful what you ask for, right? You're like, wait a second, we're going to have to get a minivan. Right? I asked for a boy, and you're going to give me boys? And she doesn't know that right off. She doesn't necessarily know that she has twins until the next verse, which sometimes we'll read in the Bible, we're thinking, all right, she's pregnant, and then God tells her next, there's twins. I mean, there may have been months in between. She may not have even known that she was pregnant. She might have just felt sick or queasy or whatever, started putting on a little weight. And 6 or 7 months later, she hears from God, and verse 23 records, and the Lord told her, the sons, hold up, right? If you're Rebekah and you're hearing this, and you're like, wait a second, I was pretty sure I was pregnant, but did you say sons with an S? Yeah, the sons in your womb will become two nations. So a couple of great little revelations here at the very start of the story. First of all, there's not just a boy in there, there's two boys in there. And second of all, the news that the mother of every teenage parent has always wanted to hear, you're going to have boys and they're going to be fruitful. They're going to multiply, right? They're going to be the father of a nation. Isn't that what you want for your teenage? You want to hear God say, your little boy is going to be so fruitful. He's going to have so many babies. But that's what she is told. And then it says, from the very beginning, the two nations will be rivals. So they're going to be twins. There's two boys in your womb, and they're going to be at odds with each other. They're going to be at each other's throats. They're going to have some problems with each other, and then their families are going to have some problems with each other, and then ultimately their ancestors are going to be at war with each other. This is the nature of what is about to happen. She's basically being told you're about to have two boys, and they won't be able to be friends. They're not going to get along very well. There's going to be some issues. And then she's given this bit of information that's important to us today. One nation will be stronger than the other. Your older son will serve your younger son. Now, to us, that doesn't seem that ridiculous. That might happen sometimes, that you might have a younger son who is perhaps more ambitious or gifted in different ways than your older son, and your older son might go to work for your younger son. But that didn't happen in this culture. That's not okay. That's not how this works. In fact, the blessing of the firstborn son is a really, really huge deal for these people, for the Hebrew people, for the early Jewish people. The firstborn son is a major, major blessing. They receive the lion's share of their father's inheritance and their father's blessing on his life. And the firstborn son is the one who's really supposed to carry the family name forward. He's the famous one. He's the one that moves the ball forward for this family line. Does that make sense? That's what And so for him to be told, for Rebecca to be told, you got two boys in there, and the younger one is actually going to be the one who carries the line forward. The younger one is actually going to be the one who's in charge. He's going to be the one who receives the inheritance, the lion's share of the blessing. And we find this out to be true because there's two boys. They're Jacob and Esau. Jacob is the younger one. And even whenever we have God identifying himself in the Psalms, he refers to himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It should be Esau by all of these standards, but we have God showing up in the story and basically saying, I don't care what the rules are. That's not my plan. I actually intend to use Jacob for the role that you thought should have gone to Esau. When the time came to give birth, Rebecca discovered that she did indeed have twins. So God was right about that part. I wonder if he was right about the other part. And what we discover next is some very, very interesting text. We have some details that are given to us here that are just strange. Some things that you wouldn't think of as being important details in the story. But what they begin to highlight for us are the differences that exist between these two brothers. That these, in fact, are two very, very different boys. And we see it at their birth, like from the origins of their story, highlight for us just how different they actually are. And I want us to take a look at these differences. These are the things that we're actually going to cover in your sermon notes. I'm going to talk about three differences that we see between these two boys that are differences that still cause divisions for us today. They still cause issues for us today. They still make it difficult for us to be friends even today. And I think maybe we can learn from them. I actually believe that the differences revealed to these two brothers shine a light on the differences that we have and the things that cause problems for us. So are you open to that? All right. Verse 25, what's the first thing that we learn about these two boys? We learned that the first one was very red at birth and was covered in thick hair like a fur coat. Now, doesn't he sound cute? Isn't that what every mother wants? A woolly red baby. He's like an Irish Grinch, right? So this baby is born. So they named him Esau. Now that's interesting because I don't know that Esau would traditionally have been considered an actual name. Esau is just a word that means hairy. It's a Hebrew word that means hairy. So they have this hairy little baby who's going to grow up to be a hairy little toddler, and eventually will be a hairy little middle schooler, and then a hairy young adult, and a hairy man, and all his life, bullies and mean people, and probably his brother, and everyone is going to shout a name at him that has got to hurt his feelings. Something that draws attention to his physical appearance, the way that he looks, the way that he appears to other people. And so his parents just save the bullies the trouble. They're just like, well, let's just go ahead and make that your name. People are going to call you that anyways. Let's just make that your name just to make it easy on them, just so you'll know who they're talking to, right? And so they call, it would be like if you had a baby, if you had a little girl and she was real big and pudgy, and so you named her Chubbs with a Z, right? If you just said at the outset, people are going to call you this all your life anyways, let's just do, like that's what happens here. And I want you to understand the nature and the gravity of what these parents have sort of done to their child. Did I cross the line? I did. I'm gonna offer you three differences. We're gonna look at the three differences that make it difficult for us to be friends. They're the differences that are highlighted through the verses that continue here. And the first one is this: we look different. If you have your sermon notes, that's the first blank is the word look. We look different. And that causes problems. For whatever reason, we have a hard time being friends sometimes with people who look different than us. Or at least we used to, right? That was a problem in the world at one point, and then we fixed it. We got over that. No, these two boys are going to have a really hard time being friends, and one of the first details that we are ever given of them is that one of them is red-skinned and hairy and furry, right? And the other, we find out later on, is a man of smooth, dark skin. And so we have these two kids who couldn't look more different. And the very first detail we're given, again, it's a very strange detail, isn't it? I mean, this is the Bible that we're talking about. We're talking about big, big name people like Jacob, like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why are we told this little tiny detail that Esau, when he's born, has a different colored skin and a different appearance about him? Well, because part of the problem that will exist between them, and it is something that gets brought up again later on in the story, part of the problem that exists between these two brothers, the reason they can't be friends on one level is because they look different. Now, are differences in appearance a good reason for us to not be friends? No. No, is this a reasonable point of conflict? Of course it's not. And if you didn't know that, well, now you know, right? So quit it. Right? That's not a reasonable point of conflict. But we've also always, we know that, we've always known that, but we've also always struggled as a society to get along with people that look different than us. That's always been a problem. If we were to apply even just the massive question, why can't we be friends? If we were to apply that to the history of our nation, one of the answers that would come back is because we look different. That's one of that is one of the carnal and original sins of our nation, is that we treated people who looked different like less than people. Like that is an issue that has been an issue for us for an extremely long time. And it's an issue that's been kind of a problem globally. It's still a problem everywhere. And I say this often as a church, and this is really important even for today's message, that you don't have to believe what we believe to belong with us. You don't have to accept everything that we believe is true, to be a part of what we're doing, to be family with us. However, I will say this: if you believe that because of the color of your skin, or because of the country that you were born in, that you have some more value, you can believe that. I can't do anything about that, but I do need to tell you that's a really silly thing to believe. And the more you get to know Jesus, the closer you get to Jesus, the more ridiculous that belief is going to become to you. That's just something you should know up front, that if you've got some problems with race and some issues of country of origin or some problems like that, I'm just going to say to you at the outset of this, I can't do anything about what you believe, but I will say the closer you get to Jesus, the more tension there will be for that very issue. I would also like to add that if this past year, or the past several years, in our nation in particular, has seemed like a time where we've experienced a great deal of disunity as people, if it seems like a time where people who look different than each other are at odds with each other in greater, bigger ways than they ever have been before, I would say, first of all, I see that. That is probably how it seems. Hate-filled people have felt free to express ignorance and idiocy in a way that I can't really remember witnessing in my lifetime. And I am looking forward to a time when those people feel really nervous again. And I know that maybe that's carnal of me, maybe that's just me talking, and not preacher me talking, but I am looking forward to a time when it becomes extremely uncomfortable and unpopular to be racist and bigoted towards people who look different again. And I say that because I believe that is coming really soon. Not a political statement, not a threat I'm leveling, but something that I believe to be true because I believe that the scriptures are true. I would almost say that I'm saying this somewhat prophetically, that if this is true, then the future of humanity is unity. The future of humanity is reconciliation. The future of humanity is love for each other, no matter what we look like. Racist and bigoted people have no place in the future of humanity. And maybe that's why it's so loud right now. Does that make sense? Maybe that's why we're hearing so much right now, because this isn't a sign of where we're headed as people. It's a sign of the dying screams of an old way. I would maybe say it this way. We can put this statement up. The signs of racism and bigotry in our country over the past several years are not indicators of where we are headed as a people, but are indicators of the dying screams of an old way of being human. That's what's happening. And so some of the tension that we even like, it feels like we're taking steps in the wrong direction. I would suggest to you that may be true. Like it may sort of look that way, but I promise you that the future of humanity is unity. The future of humanity, the kingdom of God coming to earth. And the more that people submit to the goodness and grace of God, the more that we submit to the character of Jesus alive and well in us, moving in us, the more we will become a people of unity, of accepting a people who look different than us. Colossians chapter 3, verse 10 says this, put on your new nature. You have permission to do that. Be renewed as you learn your Creator. Learn to know your Creator and become like Him. Paul starts with that, sort of like, but when you become like Him, well, He's the one that made those people who look different than you. He's the one that made both. They're His kids. And as you become like Him, you begin to see them like He sees them. In this new life, verse 11, it doesn't matter whether you are a Jew or a Gentile, circumcised or uncircumcised. Now I realize whenever I'm talking to people who might not be super familiar with the Bible that I can't skip over the words circumcised and uncircumcised. That's a distinction. Just side note, sidebar, is that all right? That's a distinction that was made in this culture because it wasn't like a surgical decision. It wasn't something that you sign a release at the hospital whenever you have a baby boy, like, do you want this done or not? The only people who were circumcised were Jewish people. So he's really just, we may talk about that. You'll look forward to that day, won't you? Invite all your friends to the day where we have a sermon on circumcision. But I just didn't feel like I could gloss over those words with, if you weren't super familiar with why it's being said. It's just another distinction that's made. It's a physical expression of what it is to be Jewish at this place in time. So and actually, many of the people that Paul is writing to in Colossians were people who would not go into the household of someone who was uncircumcised. If the male head of the household was uncircumcised, that's an unclean house. You don't go there. And so part of the reason that he's saying that is because culturally it was a division. It was a difference. So he says, barbaric, uncivilized, slave, free. Christ is all that matters, and He lives in all of us. Looks, lifestyle, country of origin, religious background, skin color, language used. These things do not determine whether a person has value or not. Jesus does. Makes sense? He has declared every person to have unsurpassable worth. He has declared every person worth dying for. That is the reality, and as we begin to accept His nature, as we begin to let His nature become our nature, we begin to see people as having unsurpassable worth too, no matter what they look like. So I would ask you to consider, and then I'll move on to the other things, how do looks impact how you treat people in your life? Do you treat people differently based on the color of their skin? Is this an issue? Is this a problem for you? Do you treat people differently because of physical attractiveness? Do you treat people that you find physically attractive different than others? These are just things that as we begin to take on the nature of Almighty God, we would begin to see all people as having unsurpassable worth, no matter what they look like. Can you even remember where we were in the story? It seems like that was a long tangent. Good thing I wrote it down. So I remember we're in verse 26. We're talking about Jacob and Esau, some of the differences that exist between them. First thing is they look different. That causes problems for them, but it doesn't have to cause problems for us. The second thing that we see is the other twin was born with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so they named him Jacob. Now, remember how they named the first son Harry because he was hairy? Well, the name Jacob literally means in Hebrew, heel grabber. Yeah, these are some parents with a plan, right? They were told months ago you're going to have two boys, and when the boys are born, they see a hairy one, and they say, well, it's Harry. Like, no filters, it's just call him Harry. And then the other one is grasping the heel of his brother and say, heel grabber, right? This is the plan that they got some real issues. You see why we talked about last week, one of the problems that we have is, it starts with me, right? These parents have problems, and that's part of the issue. Problems they have not yet resolved. But the fact that Jacob is grabbing his brother's heel is a detail that we're meant to see, something that should mean something to us. The firstborn child is the blessed one. And so the detail that the writer wants to demonstrate here is that this unborn infant, this person who couldn't possibly cognitively be like planning and plotting this, that there's something about his nature, something about his purpose that he already like subconsciously knows, to the extent that his brother is going out of the womb first and he's grabbing at his heel trying to get out ahead of him. The writer wants us to see that Jacob is ambitious, even at birth. Even before he could think about being ambitious, he's ambitious. Jacob has big plans for his life, and what we begin to discover in the story as we move forward and we learn a little bit more about Jacob and Esau, that we have two brothers who are wired very differently. That Jacob is someone who has very big plans for his life, very big ambitions, like he wants to become a nation. And Esau is someone who has much simpler plans for his life. He doesn't have ambitions to be the father of a nation. He doesn't have ambitions to really, go out into the world and do big things. He has different ambitions. It's not to say he doesn't want a family, doesn't want to do anything good with his life. It's just to say they're wired differently. We're just seeing babies before they're even really thinking about what they're doing. We're just seeing these kids are made differently. And I would maybe let that draw our attention to the second point. The second reason maybe that we would find differences in ourselves that make it difficult for us to be friends is we each have a different purpose. Something we have to be hyper aware of. We got to really think this, we got to really know this. The person sitting next to you has a different purpose on this planet than you do. Other people in this room, other people who aren't in this room, they have different purposes. We could shake it down to goals and drive, or we could shake it down to sort of disposition and gifts. But either way, what you're going to discover are the same results. We are wired differently. The things that I'm supposed to do with my life are not the same as the things that you're supposed to do with yours. And we have real problems being friends whenever I try to make what I'm supposed to do with my life what you're supposed to do with yours, right? When I try to force my opinions, my interpretations of things, my values, the things that I think are important, the things that define my purpose, whenever I say, here's what you should be doing, we have real problems. And so whenever we maybe can learn from this story, these kids are different. They have a different purpose. God has a different plan for each of them. Even in this room today, we have people who value the arts. We have people who care deeply about food. We have people who care deeply and value money. We have people who value family. We have people who value social justice. Some of us love books. Some love movies. Some people are great with their hands and some are not. And some, I imagine, like cats. I don't know. I don't know if any of you do, but I'm probably. We have different purposes. We're here for different reasons. You care about things. You're passionate about things that I'm not passionate about, that I don't care about. That's a good thing. It is. It's a great thing. It's also a source of a lot of conflict. One of the biggest answers to the question, why can't we be friends, is because I want different things for my life than you want for yours. And that creates tension. That creates issues for us a lot of times. The one thing that divides us almost as much as our appearances, our looks, are our opinions. But one of the reasons I love this church so much is that we have people with completely different opinions who somehow find a way to be family together. We have people in the room who are Republicans and people who are Democrats, and at least one person who's a libertarian. At least that's what they are when they're high. We have people who believe in evolution and people who believe in creation and people who believe those things aren't mutually exclusive. We probably have people who believe in like something like the Matrix or what. We're like that. We're really different. We have people who believe the world began on July 4th, 1776. #America, right? And that's okay. Somehow we make it work. That's an incredible thing about this. We don't have to agree on every little detail to be family together. That's not even what unity is. Right? If we have to agree to be able to get along with each other, we don't have a church, we have a cult. We don't have to agree on every little detail of every little thing. We don't have to interpret everything. We don't have to have all the same opinions. Unity Means we believe some things differently, we live lives differently, we each have different purposes, and somehow we coexist, and somehow we live as family, somehow we do good things together, somehow we love people together, somehow we move the gospel forward together. We tell the story of Jesus, we tell the story of God coming to earth because he loved people so much with our love for each other, with our unity for each other. And I like that. I like that about us. I think that was God's idea for a church. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 12 of this ambition that God has, this prophecy that God has for his church. He actually says, Paul says to us, there are different kinds of spiritual gifts, but the same Spirit is the source of them all. If you want a reading assignment this week, if you'd like to read, and we have paper Bibles, if you'd like a Bible to study with, I usually teach from the New Living Translation. You're always welcome to them. Do we have some more of that? Yeah, we have them. Grab one on the way out today. Just steal it. How would you know you're not supposed to steal? It's in the Bible. You'll figure it out once you get it home. But you can take one. I'd love for you to do that. But 1 Corinthians chapter 12 would be a great chapter for you to read and sort of ponder on, meditate on this idea of unity and our different purposes and how God does this. But he says there are different kinds of spiritual gifts. That's a statement on something sort of talking about things that are traditionally associated with charismatic Pentecostal churches, these things that God does through us and in us. And I was raised in charismatic Pentecostal environments. I read the Bible that way. There's a snake under your seat. No, I'm just kidding. Don't let that scare you about me. All I really mean by that is I believe that if this book says that I can do it, then I can do it. I believe that if this book says God can do this through you, God has done this through people, then it can be done. I believe that if it says that we can lay our hands on people who are sick and they'll be healed, then I believe we can do that. I mean, that's all I really mean by that. And that's what he's referring to here. He's saying a lot of us have these different spiritual gifts. We see God do incredible things, supernatural things through us. And the same Spirit is the source of all of these gifts, even though the gifts look different. And then he goes on to say, there are different kinds of service, but we serve the same Lord. And this is where he starts to get into purpose a little more. He's starting to say, you have a different task to fulfill here than I do. You have a different job to do here than I do. We're not supposed to pursue the same career. We would actually lose our effectiveness if we did that. We're not supposed to be carbon copies of each other, that there are different kinds of service, but we can all serve the same Lord by serving humanity differently. By playing our part differently, we all do something bigger than we would be able to do if we all did exactly the same thing. And then he goes, God works in different ways, but it's the same God who does the work in all of us. So Paul is highlighting something, and he does such a good job as he goes on, but I don't have the time to go through all of what he says in chapter 12, and even whenever he gets into chapter 13, where he talks about what love looks like and what love and community looks like. It's such a powerful picture of what God can do through people who are different, but are willing to work together despite their different purposes, and are willing to actually embrace the fact that we have different purposes that we're all fulfilling here. We have different talents and passions and culture and aspirations and opinions, and the more we embrace those things, the more effective we'll be at loving each other, and the more effective we'll be at loving this world around us that we've been called to love. He's saying we can be friends if we embrace our differences instead of always trying to convert each other, instead of always trying to convince each other that you're supposed to preach, or you're supposed to do what I'm doing, or she's supposed to do what she's doing, or we're supposed to all look a certain way. So let's wrap this up. Is that helpful? I'm going to give you the third and final thing. And I would suggest to you that the first two things that we've talked about, maybe those are novel, maybe those are new, maybe they give you some new things to sort of challenge and think about and consider. This final thing is such a huge and important and maybe a relatively new idea. This is something that I've just been discovering the reality of this more and more as I've gotten older. The last decade of my life has been a decade of discovery. I was sort of born and raised in southern West Virginia and didn't really see much outside of that context until I went to college. And then I began seeing some different things. And so what we see next is something that has been revealed to me over the last 10 years. And so maybe it's something that could be a relatively new paradigm shift for us too, if you're willing to it and open to it. Verse 27 As the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter. He was an outdoorsman. But Jacob had a quiet temperament, preferring to stay at home. We got two boys, we're sort of still highlighting this, who are wired differently. They have different purposes. They're here for a different reason, and they're made differently. They want different things. And then we have this note in verse 28. Isaac loved Esau because he enjoyed eating the wild game Esau brought. Man, these parents, I mean, seriously. I like that one because he makes the jerky, right? And then Rebecca loved Jacob because he stays at home all the time. I love that one because he makes me jerky. I love this one because he stays with me all the time. These are some parents with some real issues. They did not make this better for themselves. But as a result of this imbalanced sort of upbringing, imbalanced parenting, these two brothers are raised in very different environments. Does that make sense? Do we see that? They look different. They have different purposes, different aspirations and goals, and they're made for different, they have different skill sets and everything. And then on top of all of that, they're actually raised differently. And so I would say this, our third, the two blanks that finish out your sermon notes is, we have different life experiences. The third potential wall between us being friends, the third difference that makes it difficult for us to be friends is that we have different life experiences. You grew up in a different world than I did. That's a reality. You have seen the world differently than I have seen it. One of these boys is raised and encouraged primarily by his mother. He doesn't go out much. One of them is raised and encouraged primarily by his father, spends most of his life outdoors hunting. One of them is praised for leaving the house. One of them is praised for staying in the house. One of them has the voice of his mother doing most of the encouraging. One of them has the voice of his father doing most of the encouraging. These boys have extremely different upbringings. Not only do they look different, not only are they sort of wired differently, they're also raised differently on top of it. And so these differences just keep getting amplified and pushed. We grew up in different parts of the country. Many of us in this room. We grew up in different households. Some of us were raised in hyper-religious environments, and some of us were raised in irreligious environments, and some were raised to hate the church and to oppose the work of the church. And I get that. I see it. Some were raised by one parent. Some were raised by two parents. Some were raised by four parents or more. We have not been raised in the same world. I never met a Democrat until I was in college. I didn't know that was really a thing. I'm being completely sincere. I never had a friend who claimed to vote Democrat until I was in college. And which is really funny considering I grew up with Democratic presidents and then saw Democrats elected, and so I was growing up in a world where most of the people who voted were voting for Democrats, and still sort of true, and I never even met one, right? I was raised in an environment where you're sort of taught to believe that's not a thing. And then you meet people outside of that context and start to see, oh, I was raised in a world that is different than the world that other people were raised in. We see this, we see why this matters. We have different life experiences, and that can be a good thing. But it needs to be a thing that we're constantly aware of. We have a tendency to walk into conversations and relationships assuming that everyone sees the world basically the same way we do. Right? We treat our opinions like facts, and you're entitled to your opinion. Absolutely. You can have your opinion. You can post whatever you want to social media. I would caution you, that's public, right? Just some people, I don't know anybody in this room, I don't really get on social media yet, but I have seen some things in the news that have been posted. I'm do they know? Everybody sees that? That's just out there, just so you know. But you're entitled to your opinions. I'm just saying this as a reminder of what your opinion is, just so we know what an opinion is. It's my interpretation of things, and it is imperfect. It is influenced by my environments. It is influenced by my upbringing. I believe certain things because I was taught to believe them. You believe certain things because you were told to believe them. And other people who also love Jesus, people who also care about the good of humanity, people who are also trying to make the world a better place, believe things that are different than what you believe, and they came by those beliefs honestly. That's the reality. We have different life experiences that cause us to see the world very differently. Kofi, that plays drums over here, usually on most Sunday mornings, and has helped us out pretty much since the start of Risen, is 17 years old, and he's raised in an environment where he was really only ever exposed to jazz music. He's only ever played jazz music and only ever really listened to jazz music. And he's, like I said, he's 17, he's young, he lives in downtown Richmond and has been, I would think, exposed to a lot of music. And I'm constantly asking him, like, have you listened to this album? Have you heard this? And he doesn't even know a lot of the artists that I'm referring to that I think of as like, well, isn't everybody listening to that? And then he's asking me about various artists that I've never heard of, all of this jazz stuff. And then I go and Google it and realize, oh yeah, well that should be like the number one influence to me as a musician and singer and whatever. Like that should be a huge deal to me. I've never even heard of it. And so what we've actually discovered as we've played music together is we were raised in different environments. We have completely different influences. And I really didn't even for a long time, and maybe even today, don't have much of an appreciation for jazz music because I was never really exposed to as much. And whenever I first heard jazz music, one of the first thoughts I had was, wow, these people are so gifted and so talented and they're the best musicians on the planet. Why don't they just play the right notes? That was my that was my honest thought the first time I started listening to jazz music. But what I've actually discovered is, as Kofi and I've started playing a lot of music together, is we make better music because he allows his influences to be a part of what we're doing, because I allow my influences to be a part of what we're doing, that there's actually a better song coming out of it, if I could be a little bit, hippie for just a minute. Like, we're singing a better song because we have not said, well, Kofi, quit with the jazz stuff. That's not the right note. That's not the right way to play it. Learn the stuff that everybody else is listening to. Instead of that, we've actually said, well, hey, maybe this can work. Maybe we would make better music together if we just embrace the fact that we were raised differently. If we just embrace the fact that we have different life experiences. If we just embrace the fact that this is a different world that each of us are coming from. Does this make sense? And I think we've been invited to this as the people of God, as a church. Even if you don't believe everything that we believe yet, you've still been invited to be a part of this community and this movement that is God's church, that is bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth. And the kingdom of heaven is a kingdom of unity. It's a kingdom of reconciliation. It is the future of humanity. It's where this thing is headed, and you could get on board with it. We could start being the kinds of people who look around and say, why can't we be friends? Well, because we're different, and we need to be aware of that. We need to be conscious of that. We need to be asking the questions that raises and understanding what the answers mean. We can work through this. John records a prayer in John chapter 17. If you read your 1 Corinthians chapter 12 reading assignment and you just want something else, John chapter 17 would be a great place to go. It's an incredible record here. It's almost completely red. If you're reading a paper Bible, it's almost completely Jesus' words recorded. And Jesus is actually praying here for his church. He's praying for you. He's praying for his current church, his disciples, and he's praying for the future of his church and essentially the future of humanity, because the church is going to be the hope of the whole world. That's what we are. That's what we're doing here. And he says in chapter 22 of this prayer, he's talking to, remember, this is God essentially sort of having this conversation among himself, the community that is this one God in three persons. He's saying, I've given them, the church, I've given these people the glory you gave me, so they may be one as we are one. And so this is essentially a wordy way of Jesus saying, I've given them the ability to have unity. They can be one. I gave them the ability. God's very nature is unity, connectedness. The same sustaining and forgiving and connecting love that is God's very nature has been given to us so that we can be friends, even though we're different. And then he goes on to say this, and this is so powerful. And again, if you give me just a second to explain it, and then we'll be done. Verse 23 says, I am in them, and you are in me. May they experience such perfect unity that the world will know that you sent me. You hear that? May they experience such perfect unity that the world will know that you sent me and that you love them as much as you love me. Jesus prays that we would experience such perfect unity that the world would know that God is with us. Not necessarily, he's not praying here. Now, he does pray these things in other places. He's not praying like that we would see such prosperity and expansion and growth and power in what we do and healing and miracles. And he doesn't pray that here. He prays, let them experience such perfect unity among each other that the world would know that God is with them. That the church would have such a profound and powerful unity that the world would look at us and say, those people shouldn't be friends. Those people shouldn't be getting together in the same room. Jesus prays this for the church. Those people shouldn't be able to get along. Look how different they look. That the world would look at us and say, look, those people have such different opinions. They have different purposes. They serve in different fields. There's people in that room who are working and making lots and lots of money. And there's people who haven't worked and they live on welfare. And there's people who are first-generation immigrants and people who are the family and lineage of original settlers in the United States. There's people who have different skin colors, that the world would look at this church, would look at us as a church, and not just Risen Church, but the entire church of the risen Jesus, right? Our brothers and sisters who are meeting in other spaces all across this city and this nation and this world right now, that we would all have such unity together that the world would look at us and say, God must be with them. That must be the future of humanity.